So here we are, talking about Martin Seager's chapter in the Male Psychology Handbook.
The Palgrave Handbook of Male Psychology and Mental Health.
That's right.
Which is a wonderful document, which I've only just started reading.
Me too.
To my shame. But it was published last year, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And we started on this chapter. It was your suggestion, wasn't it, Sue?
Yes, I thought it would be a really good foundation for our studies to look at masculinity from an evolutionary perspective, as opposed to a socially constructed concept.
Yeah.
And
And we've both read this chapter, and we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the key points in it. And it did seem to me like a really solid base. If you're not sure why you would want to look at the evolutionary perspectives of what he calls archetypes, which is a Jungian concept, then a good place to start is the suicide rates. So men are 3 times as more likely to kill themselves as women, and that doesn't seem to have changed. It sort of fluctuates, but it never goes. There's never been parity.
No, there's never been a time since records began, has there?
No.
That male suicide hasn't been more prolific than
in the 60s.
Suicide.
Yeah, in the 60s, the gap shortened a little bit, didn't it? But it's gone right back up.
1 to 1.5,
Yeah.
isn't it? It was 75%, the last statistics, wasn't it?
Yeah,
for males
in 2016.
who suicided. Yeah.
So,
we're very concerned about that, aren't we? And also the lack of priority that the issue seems to be given politically or socially.
Yeah, it doesn't receive serious consideration by many charities. I mean, the author of this chapter talks about homelessness, and homeless people are over 80% more likely to be male, and he describes I can't remember which charity it is. Can you remember? No. A major charity in the UK was given consulting advice by international experts and drew up 5 sort of key first principles to combat homelessness, and the sex of the homeless person didn't come into it at all.
Not into one of them, did it?
No. So it's very sort of conspicuous the way this issue's dropped. It's dropped in the NHS. There's far more funding for it's a slightly different topic, but there's far more funding for female diseases than there is male diseases, and men die earlier than women. So, should we talk a little bit about the author quickly? He's Martin Seager. He's worked as a clinical psychologist in the NHS for ages, for 30 years, and he says that it didn't occur to him that there was a sort of gender bias until about 20 years into his career, when one of his students asked him a question, and it was a class of 30. This was the only male student, and he started to wonder whether he was missing something. He's got a lot of experience. He's been the head clinical psychologist in 2 NHS trusts, and he's done all sorts of things. I think he set up a project under the health secretary at one point. He's advised Samaritans. He came up with an interesting piece of training for the Central London office, which actually delivered better results for the male callers into the Samaritans. The number of abandoned calls from male callers went down as a result of a little bit of training, which encouraged the Samaritan volunteers to just reflect a little bit about where men are coming from and the fact that they've got different needs.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of our concerns has been, hasn't it, that we feel that counselling and psychotherapy and perhaps psychology professions often use a kind of feminised therapy model and are wanting men to engage as if they were women, you know, to be head-on emotionally sharing.
Yeah.
And in our experience, that isn't the way men process stuff, is it?
That's right, and that's what Martin Seager describes as the double bind, which he's really nailed in this chapter. He's compressed a lot of stuff, and it's really helpful the way he's done that. And the double bind is this approach of asking a man who's distressed to open up and talk about his feelings, while simultaneously pathologizing masculine traits that he adheres to. So let me try and be clearer. Can you describe it better than that?
The double bind, I'll have a go. Asking men to be vulnerable whilst attacking masculinity, which is going to make men defend themselves more. Is that?
I think that's it.
Like it?
So I'll read out how he describes it.
Oh yeah, that would be
double
good.
bind.
Let's hear what Martin says.
It's quite a long way down. And I think just before I get to that, I think what he's essentially saying is, look, maybe there's ways that we can work with masculinity that can be more therapeutically effective. And just asking a man to open up and be more like a woman is very difficult when that man doesn't feel like he's supported or understood or is accepted at where he's at, and so it's difficult to be congruent when your version of being congruent is unacceptable in the kind of overarching cultural narrative.
Yeah, he talks about an empathy gap, doesn't he?
Yeah.
That if there was enough empathy for men, they might feel more comfortable owning all of their aspects.
Yeah. So here it is. This is quite a way down. He's got a subheader. Expanding the argument, 6 reasons why a socio-educational approach to male help seeking and suicide is counterproductive. First one is a double bind. Encouraging men to seek help and open up to their more vulnerable feelings can only work if that message was congruent with society's other messages to men. But it is clear from everything he talks about above this that the expectations, actions and policies of society towards the male gender, I think he means sex, are not protective and actually give the opposite message. It is well recognised that double binds actually contribute to serious mental health problems. This means that in the name of trying to improve men's mental well-being, our self-contradictory public health messages may in fact be damaging it further. I think that's quite extraordinary, but it's definitely been my intuition that that's the case from my training and my experience so far.
I was thinking of the double bind. I can only remember half of it, but something about the expectations society has of men to be risk takers and protectors actually involves the kind of characteristics and qualities that are then pathologized. Yeah.
So it's impossible. It's an impossible situation. So yeah, like you said, the society expects and takes for granted that protector role, the provider role, the ability to suffer. So, 96% of workplace deaths are male in the UK, I think is a stat.
Yes. Falling from heights and being run over by
moving vehicles. Yeah, the big ones. So everyone needs and expects and takes for granted those aspects of traditional masculine roles, and the archetypes of that are feeding those roles or facilitating them are an ability to, he's got a list of them here actually, a greater instinct to ignore personal safety and confront danger, a greater instinct to protect others and greater shame at failing to do so, and a lower sense of entitlement to receive help or protection from others. So those things are really very deeply embedded, is his argument, and it's not just his argument. And it's been written about elsewhere that these archetypes are kind of emanating, they're coming up from the very base of the old brain, the limbic system, and they're to do with the structure of how our brains are actually put together. And as they come up further into the more recent parts of the brain, we sort of attach stories to them, and they manifest as cultural norms. And we're generally, I think that you'd probably agree, the mainstream culture at the moment is saying that no, that's just from an education. We're only doing these things, men are only doing these roles because they've got an erroneous belief that, to be a man you have to be a certain way. And I think Seager and a lot of other people are starting to say, well, hang on a minute, there's so much evidence, if you look back through history, that this is a biological thing. However, there's no evidence that, on the contrary. So we've been educating our children in the last couple of decades maybe to be a different way, and school kids are taught mainly by females. A lot of kids grow up without their dad around. There's a lot more and more single mother families. So if it was going to change, maybe it would have changed, but actually we're finding that there's no evidence of that. Men who grew up with a single mum, like myself, don't seem to be more feminine. In fact, all that's maybe happening is we're slightly more lost because we haven't had an example of how to nourish the masculine side of ourselves and be pro-social with it, and do those protector provider roles, and use the aggressive energy that we have in a really productive way, rather than suppress it so it goes into harmful, damaging activity or shadow stuff, which is a different thing.
It's really nicely put. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Just having a look at what else I wanted to say. Was there anything that...
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's another... Seager comes up with these very succinct, kind of compressed little pieces of information which I think are really helpful. And he's saying on page 239, our own research team has, for clinical purposes, come up with a simple and practical definition of the male archetypes, or gender script, consisting of 3 schematic elements that we have begun to test in a series of studies. 1, fighting and winning. 2, providing and protecting. 3, maintaining mastery and self-control.
They're really succinct, aren't they?
And this is where I think it gets really exciting, is towards the bottom. He's talking about why an archetypal approach to male suicide works much better. So he suggests we could, as therapists, reframe our messages. So rather than sort of saying to men, strength does not matter, which is a bit like saying to a woman, beauty doesn't matter. And we all know that that's not going to help, because at a very deep level, that's what a lot of women really believe, and at a deep level, that's what a lot of men believe. Strength does matter. So, how do you reframe that? He suggests by saying, by seeking help, you are taking action, taking control, and fighting your problems. It takes strength and courage to confront and master your problems. Looking after yourself means protecting your family. So there's a real embracing of the masculine archetypes there in order to help nourish the male client, rather than pushing them away and denying their masculinity.
And a respect for traditional masculinity, you know, which has been so denigrated, you know, with the terms toxic masculinity and other phrases.
And is this happening? I mean, a therapist doing this anywhere, as far as you're aware? Working with masculinity in this way?
I think a lot of published material would indicate otherwise. You know,
that's my impression.
If we think about the Duluth model and domestic abuse.
I mean, I was trained in that not long ago.
Yeah.
I was working at an agency, and it's still being rolled out.
Men are the perpetrators, women are the victims. The way men are constructed within the Duluth model is looking at them through the radical feminist lens, and the very, very negative attributes that are projected onto them. You know, they abuse in 8 different ways. The Duluth wheel is an excellent descriptor of abusive behaviours, but the way it's used in practice is men are expected to identify with all those abusive behaviours.
And and where's the affirmative support? You know, it's a bit like, you know, in the family court system. I saw a list. I was doing some training with an agency, and I saw a list of all the examples, all the types of behaviour that have been successfully used and acknowledged in the family court system in this country as as versions of domestic abuse. And one of them is not sharing your feelings with your partner. And from an evolutionary perspective, the ability to stay focused on a task and detach from your emotions is why we're still alive. You know, that is, and that's it's not a controversial thing to say that's there in the biology and the science. So the male brain is different from the female brain, and obviously these are differences that are borne out by, you know, large scale studies. They're not we're not saying that, no one's saying that every man's like that and every woman's like that, but there's a difference, and it plays out in these. Well, the archetypes are our way of understanding with it and grappling with it in the therapy room. How does it end?
I didn't get to the end.
So going back to suicide.
Sorry, I'm just going to grab something.
Why an archetypal approach to male suicide works. And so he's talking about reframing the act of seeking help as a strength. You know, you're taking control and you're fighting. Fighting and winning is one of the archetypal behaviours. And he's saying it makes sense to tailor male-friendly approaches to situations that provoke a deep sense of masculine shame, worthlessness and failure. These situations are the ones that show up in the suicide statistics if we care to look. First one is unemployment. Second one is loss of relationship with a partner. Then there's loss of contact with children or loss of the father role. In the UK, 96% of parents applying to the family courts for access to their children were men, and less than 50% of these applicants resulted in the father gaining overnight contact. That's from Harding and Newnham 2015. Sexuality. This is an interesting one. The archetype predicts that gay men will feel even more suicidal pressure than lesbian women, simply because negative attitudes to homosexuality will interact with the male archetype even more strongly than with the female archetype. This fits with the evidence from Cochrane and Mays 2000 in the US, who found that the suicidal risk could be as much as 5 times higher for gay men than for heterosexual men.
That's shocking, isn't it? That's... yeah.
And then he comes up with a couple of real-world examples where a male-friendly initiative has actually had a tangible effect on the outcome of therapy. The first one I think I mentioned is in the Central London office of the Samaritans, where Samaritans is a free service where you can call any time of day or night, and you get to speak to someone for as long as you need to. It's a great organisation. I worked there for 3 years. I learnt a lot. So they came up with a piece of training for their staff in the London office that presented life from a masculine angle. These included a conversational session with 2 musicians playing and exploring the lyrics and meaning of blues music, so quite open and creative. A session with female actors from the Royal Shakespeare Company playing male roles, including those with power and responsibility, in scenes from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, and discussing with the audience the psychological impact of this on them and the insight it gave them into the pressures and responsibilities of these male characters. And the third one was an interactive talk from a psychologist about masculine ways of dealing with and expressing emotion, emphasising the idea that men were not emotionally illiterate but rather differently literate, and that men could be reached if the listener tuned into their archetypal language, focusing on action, story and meaning rather than feelings. I think that's so good. This presentation was also punctuated by a piece of emotional classical music played by a solo male cellist. I mean, that just sounds really powerful.
Very rich, doesn't it?
Yeah. So,
evocative.
Yeah, so they got really clear quantitative results from that. So out of a sample of 1,000 calls from men before this training, 1 in 3 lasted 5 minutes or less, so they were they dropped out of the call basically. After the training, 1 in 4 dropped out, so it went right down, and the proportion of women dropping out stayed the same at 1 in 6.
It's such a success story.
He gives another example as well of a charity called Calm in Liverpool, I think it is, which has had amazing, in 10 years, 99 to 2010, the Merseyside suicide rates fell by 55%, and this was because of Calm's activities, doing all sorts of things in the local community, targeting males, challenging social assumptions about male distress and suicide.
They funded the sculpture we were talking about, I think.
Right, on the
ITV building.
Okay. They sound like a really interesting organisation.
Yes.
So, Seager's conclusion. You're looking at another piece by Seager.
It's only because it's a summary of his work. It's a very succinct summary of, I suppose, implications for practice, really. He's talking about the best kind of work with men is not constrained by the traditional feminised model whereby we're head on, face on, and expecting emotional expression. Focus more on telling the story, which is what you said, more on telling the story than exploring feelings. Honouring male banter.
Yes.
I mean, that's one of the things I really enjoy about working with men is the bantering. I'm an ex-football fan. I used to love the football terraces.
It is very funny, isn't
it?
it?
The humour, yeah, absolutely.
The chanting and stuff.
So enjoying the male banter and male vocabulary.
Who did you support?
Variable, depending on my boyfriend at the time.
Oh, right.
It's very codependent in those days. Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah, so honouring male banter, male vocabulary, as attempts to make connections rather than seeing them as defences or avoiding, and allow more space for non-verbal communication and activities that can be a bridge to verbal communication.
I'm just wondering, I
was thinking of Don't Calm, aren't they behind the men's sheds? Where?
Yeah, I know about the men's sheds. They might be.
Yeah.
I just I wonder, given the profile of the average therapist, how many therapists out there would feel comfortable offering that. So going through what you just said, so because there's a lot of therapists who do have either implicitly or explicitly quite radical views on masculinity, I think. Is that fair to say?
Most of the literature that we look at seems to
show that.
From a more...
There was an article by Bazzaro.
Manu Bazzano.
Manu Bazzano.
Yeah.
Am I saying that right?
Manu Bazzano.
In Therapy Today, in November, December 2019.
Yeah.
And it's been really interesting looking at the response to that. We've talked about it with people.
Yeah,
I looked at the last edition and there was a couple of letters published, and it's really split opinion. He was arguing very much that masculinity is just a problem, really, is kind of what I got from it, and it manifests in insidious ways, some of which are toxic, some of which are even more insidious because they're not. I'm going to have to I think we should probably do another video on that, because
I think so.
It was just full of things that I can't accept. Really, I'm afraid.
Well, it came from a kind of very radical feminist frame, didn't it? And also somewhat Marxist frame, I would say.
Yeah.
I thought he really hooked people in. In the very first paragraph, there was mention of Trump, swastikas, and penises.
Yeah, none of which really seemed to be that relevant. I mean, it was sort of. I felt that it didn't really stitch that well together as an article. But then I've spoken to someone who really knows his stuff in family court system, and he agreed that he thought that all those points were quite well put. So it's a bit like Marmite, isn't it? I guess.
Yeah. I mean, on a macro scale, we're living in quite polarised times.
Yeah.
Aren't
So
we?
how could it be otherwise? Yeah. Good. Okay. So that's our review.
So positive. It's a very sad and difficult topic, male suicide. But Martin Seager's gone quite a way, hasn't he, to identifying what's going to help men more than what's being offered at the moment.
Yeah.
And we're really keen, aren't we, to make therapy more male friendly and
where it needs to be. Yeah.
To help more men.
Yeah.
To be helpful to more men.
And for men that need help, let them know somehow that it's okay to be as they are, and they can receive
Yes.
support where they're at. They don't have to change to receive support,
No.
which is unfortunately how a lot of it is pitched,
Yes.
especially in the domestic abuse arena, but not
Mhm.
just there.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay. Thank
Are
you.
we done? Yeah,
I think we're
thank
done.
you.
Yeah, that was really good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Enjoyed that.